Welcome back, everyone. I'm Brian, and this is week 5 of Structural Anatomy, arms. So we're going to draw some arms. And today, particularly, I want to draw some arms, or at least one arm specifically. We're not going to draw that many. I want to spend a little more time on them, so we're only going to draw 2 arms today, right? But I want to talk a little bit more about mapping, because I got into that a little bit, and shadows and edges and that kind of stuff, and how the anatomy affects those things, right? So we'll kind of do like a warm-up drawing a little bit, and then maybe like a slightly longer drawing after that. But I want to go over kind of how that stuff works a little bit more. Because, we talked a lot about all the structure and the anatomy and how all that works, but now what do we do with it, right? Like once you, start to understand it better, you got to take that information and sort of inject it back into your drawing, but without using all of it. It's really, at the end of the day, it's about using a lot of this stuff strategically and trying to understand what parts we need and what we don't in order to get a point across, as an artist doing whatever it is that we're doing. Okay, shoulder. Hang on, this isn't in a good spot. This needs to move over a little bit. This arm is like bent like 90 degrees basically. So it's at a bit of an angle. It's coming like this way and then bending like 90 degrees up that way. Right? And then the fist, it's like a fist at the end where he's holding a sword. For the reference, I gave you at least a couple, maybe 3 or 4, where it's all arms like doing stuff, like holding a sword or a pole, and then a couple of them have both arms in the photo, so you can try drawing both together and see if you can get them to work kind of cohesively together as a unit. I debated doing the demo about that, but I decided to focus on shadow mapping instead. Okay, so shoulder sitting up here. We're looking at this arm from the side, right? So if this is the top of the shoulder then, right, it's going to pop out here and down, right? And then the gesture, make this shoulder a little bigger. Down about there, right? And then the gesture is going to run down this way. And what I'm looking for is kind of where the tendon for the bicep sits. It's kind of guiding where that goes a little bit. And then it's going to run out this way. Back here, right, we have the deltoid kind of connecting to the trapezius right in here. Trapezius locks on. And then we have the scapula, right, sitting back here. I would recommend including the scapula if you're drawing arms and you're seeing the back. And really, I would recommend including the pec too, like the pectoralis on the front, because that's kind of an arm muscle also. Not kind of, I mean, it is. It attaches to the arm and moves the arm. But we can find out kind of where that shoulder blade is sitting, and then kind of where the gesture for this arm is going to sit. It's getting pinched up in here, right? And then sweeping back down this way. Based on how that looks, I think that shoulder blade could sit a little bit lower. It's really squished in there though, because his arm is being pulled back against the shoulder blade kind of, so it's sitting like right in here. I guess that was pretty good. That was a good spot for it. Right, trapezius kind of comes off that way. Now he's holding this sword, and it's gigantic. I'm not going to draw the whole sword. I mean, it would literally, I could spend a whole class just trying to draw the, hilt or whatever that part is. I don't think that's what it is. It's something else. But it's complex. So I'm going to draw like a simplified sword, right? So I'm just going to start with a line that's going to go from here. Now I know where trapezius sits. It's going to sweep way out here to this hand. Look for the angle that it sits at. And hang on, let me do it this way actually. Go that way, right? And it's resting on there, but remember the sword, like the center of the sword is what I'm looking for here. And it's kind of going through here. But the sword itself is bigger, right? Like the blade is like this, more kind of shooting off that way and then like up this way. Wow, that was not a good angle. Hang on. Oh, actually, maybe it's okay. Let's see if I can make it sit on there correctly. Okay, so it's overlapping, or getting overlapped by trapezius. Pull it back out, and then we get more sword shapes, right? So that's going to take some time. I'll probably work on this after class a little bit and get a decent sword shape in there for you guys, but for right now, we just need to get some stuff placed, right? And we need to keep it all in alignment as best we can, right? Make sure things are aligning with that initial line that I put down that I meant as a center line. And sort of making sure everything stays more or less equal on each side of it. You're probably looking at this thinking like it's definitely less equal right now, but I think we can fix it up later. Like I said, we don't need it to be perfect right this second. Just need it placed well. Okay, so that's enough that I can keep working on my gesture for the arm now, right? So I'm going to come in and find this part of the arm, run it up here. Right, and then we get a straight for the elbow, sitting back here, connecting to the wrist. Right, and his wrist now is sitting in here. Right, about like that. And maybe back a little more even. No, maybe not. It's probably fine. So then the rest of the hand then comes in here. And I tried to leave enough space and get it spaced just right that the hand now can sort of wrap up and over this section. Kind of as like a box. See if we can get it to kind of lock in there. It's probably a little bit wide right now still, but I think it fits. Anyway. Don't get too caught up in the hand, right? We're focusing on arms. So that's pretty good for the arm, I think, for the gesture for the arm. We've got to figure out, okay, how much detail do we need to put in here? Well, we need more of the bicep for sure. But unlike last time, right, I'm not going to go in here and put in every single thing. I need enough to kind of guide where my shadow patterns are going to go, right? So we get bicep coming out here, wrapping around. Right, and then we get tendon right there, aligning along the gesture. right? Now remember, brachioradialis comes way up here and locks on to the humerus running through here, right? So thinking about our elbow, what's going on here, right? We have the ulna, which we're seeing a little bit of it kind of right here, like the back part of it. You know, and that's running, of course, as a straight out to the wrist. And then the humerus is kind of attaching up above that. You know, the epicondyle of the humerus is sitting like here, basically. Covered by a bunch of stuff, but it's like about in here. You know, so then we have this kind of rotating around that part. So we got to figure out how all this is attaching, right? So the humerus is running through here, which means this is coming up and attaching kind of around here and back. Keep this stuff light. Now, if it looks kind of strange in here, like this muscle's like detaching and getting pulled apart, it's because it kind of is. It's actually two muscles. I always just point to it and say brachioradialis, but it's two muscles, right? It's brachioradialis and then extensor carpi radialis longus underneath it. And that one, right, this one kind of runs on the bone, and then the other one attaches like onto the actual epicondyle itself, and it's sitting like down here. And you can see it kind of coming out. More like this way, right? And coming out and actually attaching onto there. Right, so it actually is two things. Doing that, and then of course we can just simplify our forearm muscles again. I'm not going to do, I mean it is a group, right, of flexors, or extensors, sorry, on the top. But we'll just break that down into the two muscles that are there real quick so we can see them pretty clearly. So we have one here, and then the other one down here wrapping down onto the bone a bit, right? So it's sitting like down here, and then connecting out to the wrist, right? Remember we get wrist shape, and then we get a bunch of tendons, or tendons up here, but then muscle kind of draping off underneath. Right, so we get tendinous section and the muscle section. That connects probably with a straight up into the elbow. Right, and then what's left after that is just the triceps. So we got to make sure that's locked on here correctly. I think it could be a little larger probably. Come out kind of this way. That way give a slight indication for separation between the long head and the medial head. I always get my long and short heads mixed up. That might be off. But the one that attaches to the scapula is coming down and then sort of disappearing around the other side of the medial head here. Okay, so I think that's good. Right, we can find maybe real quick our attachment point up here. Okay, lighten that. That's super prominent. So I'm gonna lighten the whole thing. And we'll talk about mapping a little bit. And what to do with this stuff. Sorry, I'm just thinking more about what I drew here, right? So we have the wrist in here, connecting out to the hand. Notice I pulled this in and separated it from this part because we're seeing the thumb actually a little bit separately. So I wanted to pull it out of there. Okay, so mapping, right? Thinking about just kind of simple how rounded things are, right? Are they more or less rounded? Are they more angular or are they more circular? Talking about edges, just real quick, I'll just draw, watch, we have a cylinder. I know you guys have seen this already because I've done this in the critiques a number of times. All right, so we have a cylinder and say a box. This is the quickest way I've found to describe edges so far. All right, so here's our box. Now this one, of course, is rounded, right? Very round form, and this one, very angular form, right? So if it's being lit, say these things are being lit kind of from this direction, right? We're going to pick up a shadow along here as it kind of falls into, or as the light, disappears and it rolls into shadow. That's going to create a soft edge, right? So we have different edges that we can use to describe shadows. And we're going to have kind of our soft edges, right, which we can kind of build up slowly. They look nice and soft, right, kind of like that. And then we've got kind of more firm type marks that we could use, kind of like that. And then we have kind of our crisp type marks. And then everything in between, right? There's actually an infinite variety of this stuff that we can choose. But that's basically it, right? Soft, firm, hard. If we want to really simplify things down just for explanation purposes. So if we have a more rounded form, we're going to go in the softer range, right? So it's going to be a soft edge right here as it rolls into shadow. Right? And then this is all shadow right in there. Right, but nice soft edge. This one, however, as it rolls into shadow, since this is a really angular form, and this plane, this top plane ends very abruptly, and just goes boom, boom, very angular, we get a hard edge. So when we fill this in now, right, what we end up with here is a hard edge. And so you can see, depending on which one of those we choose, it describes a different form, right? This is a boxier type form, circular type form. And then we have more extreme examples, right? We can come over here and actually, let's do it right here. I drew this in the last critique video, so I'm sorry if you guys already saw this, but sometimes I draw things and then I think like, oh man, there's a whole bunch of audit people that would probably like to see that too. So I'm gonna draw it again real quick. Okay, here's a form that's not turning quickly, right? It's rounded, and it's rounding the corner very slowly. So this is going to be a more extreme soft edge. Like say it's still being lit from above down this way. So as it rolls away from there, we're going to get like the softest edge ever. And then we can fill it in. You can see it just barely fades out. Right, really slow. So that's what we have to think about when it comes to mapping, right? If we're doing shadow mapping, part of it is shape design and considering the shape of the muscle and the shape of the shadow. Right? But then it's also considering the form itself and trying to figure out what's going on with these things. So when we come back up to the arm now, we're going to be thinking about how rounded are things, how angular are things, So I'm going to come up on the forearm and start trying to inject shadows kind of back in there essentially. So we'll come in here and look at the wrist and find like a more angular form, right? This is a boxy form, Remember, the box had more harder edge, right? Now, the thing about the human body is even though we simplify this down to a box, like there's no really hard edge on here. The only way we'll get those is from cast shadows or the end of a form, right? Where a form bumps up against another form, right? Like in here, we might get a hard edge. But not because the arm is angular, it's because of the little crevice kind of created between, where it's pinched together. And then the other place is cast shadows, right? Because I didn't talk about cast shadows at all over here. But they basically start hard and then soften up as they move away from the thing that's casting them. So we'll come in here and start thinking kind of soft, but still kind of hard edge, right, for the wrist. Coming around in here. These parts are more rounded, right? So these are very rounded forms, like this, a little less so. This goes round, 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 like it all wraps, it's all rounded stuff, right? So we're gonna come in here and keep this really soft. Right, keep this soft, and then notice it goes from soft now and it starts to firm up a bit. Like there's a difference between how this edge looks and how this edge looks. And that implies that this one, right, is a little more rounded, or less rounded, sorry. This one's a little more angular. And each of these are actually a little more rounded. So then we just kind of work our way through, considering each little muscle on the way down and what's going on with it. So we get extensor carpi radialis longus and forget the name. I don't want to say the wrong name, so I'm just going to say the extensor right underneath there. Comes up and creates this kind of shape. So shape design also plays a role. It's not just edge. It's also designing these shapes well, which is as difficult as, or more so, really, than choosing a correct edge. So then I'm going to lock these together, right? I'm going to pull these apart a little bit and let this shadow merge down into this one. And let these lock into one single shape right here. All right, that'll be the back of it. And then we have bone down here, so maybe a slightly more firm edge. And then it sort of connects this way a bit. Back again, pretty bony, so not getting too soft. Right, and then up in here, we're getting that extensor carpi radialis section. Right, so our lock's on there. Get this part locking back here. Okay, so the only other shadow now is running back along this way, right? And I'm going to change this a little bit. Sorry, just didn't like the way those were connecting. Okay, so back here now, right, we get some pinching kind of up around in here a little bit. That was too much. Keep that subtle. If anything, it's just a shadow shape with a little kind of little striations coming out of it, a tiny bit. And then our shadow, right, is going to get a little more firm in here, and then soften up a little bit more back around here. But we're going to have to change it a bit because on the reference, that edge just looks the same almost all the way down. That's not going to be good for the drawing, so we're going to have to change that up a little bit, right? Let that soften a bit, and then we have this part running down the medial part around here, and then we get this part kind of popping back out, maybe with a bit of a hard edge. Yeah, that's pretty much it for mapping, I think. Then back here, like I was saying, we have a cast shadow, right? So there's a little hard edge right back up in here. That just sits right next to the arm and sort of cuts back that direction. In fact, I'm going to pull this out a little bit more. Okay, then cast shadow, kind of cut back this way, back this way. Right, wraps around that muscle right there and then drops down and kind of disappears back behind this stuff. But I don't want to draw over that stuff too much. Anyway, that's it for that one. Let's do the next one. Okay, so next up, it's going to be a bigger arm. And this one's a little bit, I don't want to say awkward, but there's some stuff going on with it that we're going to have to take note of. It's a difficult arm for sure, you know, and it got a lot of shadow and it's going to take a little bit of work. So the first thing, I mean, I'm just going to look and see what's going on, right? And I noticed that he's got his arm on the stool and he's pushing his shoulder up, right? So he's like kind of has his arm sitting up high. And so it's taking all those shoulder muscles and pulling them upward, which is kind of changing the way that the striations go. So we got to be aware of that. And then he also has his arm twisted, right? Like he's taking his shoulder and like twisting the upper part of his arm away from us a bit. You know, so we're seeing more of his tricep. And you can try it yourself, honestly, and that's what I would recommend. Someone asked me the other day, how did I study all this stuff, you know? And a lot of that had to do with thinking about like how this stuff relates to me, right? So I would learn about a muscle, but then I would think of it in terms of my own arm and actually feel my arm and try to figure out where it connects to things and how that all functions and how it makes my arm move. And for some reason, thinking about it in terms of my own arm helps me kind of figure out how that works. I don't know if that works for everybody, but it helped me. The other thing is to actually try that pose then, right? And so take it a step further and say, oh wait, if this was my arm and I had it in this position, how would I get it to look like that? Oh, I'd have to actually take it and like rotate my arm a bit, you know, so his arm's straight, but rotated and pushed up, like kind of all three of those things. So we got to figure out how to draw that. And we're going to start with top of the shoulder up here. going to be the shoulder. Hang on, we'll move it up a little bit. I don't think it's going to fit. Okay, so gesture first, right? What's going on with the shoulder? It's coming in here, connecting over, down, and then we get it's kind of pulled off this direction a bit, right? Cuts in, then we get the middle part. Right, now this is kind of the tricky part, right? Like all that seems standard. This stuff though is being pulled around and back in a weird way. So we're starting to get this part coming out here, but it's wrapping like this and in here. And then there's one more part down in here. Right, so that's basically our big tricep, or no, sorry, not tricep, deltoid shape. We'll get to the tricep in a minute. Okay, so usually I'll start with the shoulder. You don't need to put in that much detail. The circle would have been fine, but there was some interesting stuff going on with it that I kind of wanted to point out. And I'll point it out again also. But the gesture comes next, right? So again, thinking of gesture, running from here all the way down. And his wrist is going to end up aligned with like this part of his shoulder about. So it's going to end up right about there. Sure this actually fits on here. Right, so for the back part then, pop out a bit. Oh, here, we'll just mimic this. This part's going to go more or less almost straight down, but out a little bit. And then this hand, I think, is going to sit down here. I guess won't fit as well as I hoped, but that's okay. We don't need to draw that. Elbow. Figure out where that's going to go. It's going to sit right down in here. There's a straight, remember, for the ulna. So we need to figure out if that straight comes straight up, how does that relate to the deltoid? Should sit just outside of it. If I look at that relationship on the reference, that seems pretty close. It could angle a little more, I think. Out a little more, maybe. But just a tiny bit. I think that's pretty good. That's it for the gesture. So keep in mind where this elbow point's going to go, for sure. And then the shape of the wrist is going to be kind of like that. So I don't think we're seeing that much of that part. Maybe we are. I don't know. It ends right around there. It's going to be a tough shape to get that to wedge in with the hand because it's so like crunched up. So let's see. We're kind of looking down at this part a little bit. Like it down here. Down here. Not a lot, just a little bit. And actually, based on where the photo was taken, we're looking almost at this part, down at it just a tiny bit, but like almost straight on. Just a little more so. And then the farther down we go, the more these bend until we get to this wrist. But we're like looking at the wrist like straight on. Like there's not much to it really. Okay, so anatomy-wise, right, we got to figure out what's important and what's not. So the elbow is always important because that's going to kind of guide where a lot of this stuff goes. So we found a straight for the ulna, right? It's going to kind of lock in here. We have the humerus popping down and connecting, not right to it. It's kind of like underneath it a little bit, you know, because this rotates around it. So directly above this point, we have triceps coming down and connecting to the ulna. The humerus itself sits back a little bit, but it's rotated in a way where the epicondyle is sticking out probably about here. Right, like that. And then this part's going and kind of like rotating around that part. Right, so we're always trying to figure out how the elbow functions. How it functions, and it needs to be a little straighter though. I think we see a little less of this and a little more of this. That looks pretty good. So remember now, that's going to kind of guide where the rest of this stuff goes. So we have the humerus now going up this direction, and that should be enough to kind of tell us where all this stuff locks together. So let's see. So if that's the humerus, then the brachioradialis is going to come lock right up into here, basically. God, his shoulder is so twisted. But it's going to come lock up into here. Come down this way. And then he's got his thumb. I'm trying to do this with my own arm off to the side right here real quick and make sure I'm doing this right. Yeah, so I don't think his wrist is pronated. It's supinated, right? So it means, you know, we don't have the cross in the bones. So the brachioradialis is just going to drop straight down pretty much, right? It's just going to drop basically down this way. And lock right into here. And it just connects right into the thumb side of the wrist, essentially. Right into there. And then remember, it's locking up onto here and then wrapping kind of back around this way. And just sort of doing that. And then we get, remember, everything else locking up into this epicondyle, which is sort of disappearing up underneath the brachioradialis a little bit, and extensor carpi radialis longus also. Don't forget that one. I tend to group them together, like I said, but they're both there, right? And so we're getting muscle kind of coming out like this way, and then this one that sort of comes down and wraps around this bone right here, right? Sort of drops down, locks onto the bone. Remember, that just gives us that flexor group. It's really just like a few muscles that we can lock in there. All right, so we get elbow shape. We're also seeing a little bit of the anconeus in here, I think, which is kind of like a triangular muscle. Sort of wraps onto here, but I don't think we're seeing that much of it. I think it's just kind of wrapping in here a little bit. It's not one we talked about too much, but it just sits on the elbow, little triangle. And then we get flexors draping off back behind here, right? And then connecting back onto the wrist. Kind of like that, although now the wrist is too wide. So let's shrink it a little bit. A little better. We'll come in and find biceps, right? Connecting up under here, popping out this way. Right, cuts back in. And then turns into tendon right about in here. And then we get, it's not like super clear because partly because there's a vein running right past it. And then that whole area, there's like a little pocket in there. So depending on what he does with his arm, it just kind of pulls things differently. You know, so things never quite line up like they do when we're studying anatomy, right? Because in reality, everything's like twisting and pulling on what's around it. And then the skin tends to unify things a bit. Right, so because of the skin and stuff, we're just going to get like a nice smooth connection right through here, even though it's not really the case. Okay, add a little tricep on here. So his tricep is really big, right? I mean, that's the bulk of the arm on this one. Right, so it pops down and then back, right, and then connects down in here. I think the elbow maybe can move up a little bit. Yeah. Seems a little better. So then we figure out, right, what's going on with these connections up here. We have, I don't think we're seeing much brachialis. I mean, if anything, there's just a little bit of it poking out in here. But like I said, I mean, the skin just kind of covers right over that. It just makes, like, we don't have to put that in, I don't think. What we need is a tricep, and his tricep is really big, right? So it's wrapping back around here, right? And then wrapping back like this also, and then connecting onto here. Right, so his tricep's huge. And I know when people draw arms, or at least when I started out drawing arms, I always tended to make the bicep the big part, or assumed it was, and it's really not. The bicep's not like that big of a muscle, really. The brachialis is bigger than the bicep, but you really only see that from the inside of the arm. And then on the outside is the tricep that's actually kind of the big muscle. You know, so here we have, his tricep's also super activated because he's straightening his arm out, like flexing his tricep. So we're getting this muscle in here, like quite activated. You know, you can really see it. Kind of locking on here. And then it's got all these different like striations running through there because he has his arm twisted. So it's not just flexing, but it's like twisting it also, which is what's creating these kind of like twisted kind of striations running through there, which I'm going to leave those for a shadow. I don't want to put those in quite yet. We'll get those in a minute. That's it. That's the important stuff, right? Understanding that this deltoid, there's some interesting stuff going on with it, is important to know. So the shape of this part is going to be a little better. Okay, I think that's enough. So that seems like a decent sized arm, I think. Although I feel like the deltoid could still be a little larger. I think it's too small. Sounds kind of crazy, but I think it comes out farther this way. Right, get that S curve in there to show that the arm's being twisted. And that will extend this part out, make that seem larger, right? And then this part, connect in there, we get pectoralis. Coming out from here. I don't know, we don't need to draw much more than that. I think that's good. I think that's, bringing this part down, I think helped make that seem a lot larger. Make this part a little bigger too. Okay, so let's lighten this. This got way too dark. Lighten that with my eraser. In fact, a lot of this got too dark. Try and keep your lanes nice and light. I tend to get carried away because at least like when we had, in-person classes, I always felt like people in the back row couldn't see, so I tended to draw darker when I did demos. And I don't know, it just became a habit. So here we go. We're going to map this thing. And thinking about, remember the box and the cylinder that I drew on the last one, and trying to figure out kind of how that all is going to relate to this stuff, right? So each little section, thinking logically, how rounded is this form, right? This is pretty rounded. So we're going to have a soft edge. Also picking up more and more of these little striations maybe within the shadow pattern. Not a lot more, but we can include a couple little indications here and there, right? We get hard edge back along here, soft edge in front of it. So always trying to draw complete shapes, right? Soft edge with a hard edge behind it for the end of the form. Soft, little hard edge behind it. Soft, hard, right? And just thinking through now how this is going to go. So we get soft edge, really soft right here, right? Because this form is turning really slowly now. Okay, so we get a shadow cutting across here, right? And that one connects into this one. But again, very softly. So thinking about the different heads of the deltoid, right, and how they all align right in through here. Okay. Hard edge under there. Again, little soft edge back under here. This now is connecting down into the tricep. So a little hard edge down here at the bottom of this form, and then things will start to soften up again, right? Because they start getting more rounded. And we even get interesting little shadow in here. But back to soft edges, right? So now we're back to soft, right? Because this form, of course, is more rounded. Right, then we get this little pocket up here. Right, between the two heads, because they're being activated quite a bit. So we need to figure out how to get that to read. Thinking more about those underlying forms. But there is a little shadow, right? Little cast shadow right here. This comes up, connects out here a bit. There's a little cast shadow right there. So it's going to have a little hard edge to it that's going to soften up kind of down here. And then little cast, or not really cast shadow, but just the end of this shadow is going to sit back up along here. But notice I'm not making this as hard of an edge, because it immediately turns back into a form shadow right here. Now these forms right here, I'm going to be really careful with, because these have those striations from the tricep being twisted. So I want to try to maintain some of those if I can. Right, so sort of cutting down, over, and then around these ones, right? So we get another little striation, cuts over, and then down around here, which should be happening, well, no, about there, right? And this one cuts over this way. Connects up with this one. Just locks into this elbow. Right, like right in there. So all of this is in shadow. Then we come in and we get a little cast shadow under here, which again turns into the end of a shadow, which turns into a form shadow. It's really soft right in here. Same thing down here. It's going to come in this way. Start out pretty soft and then really connect down in this way. right? So we really want to show that thing's going and wrapping around kind of a specific direction. Right, and then we get kind of the bottom of that form, so we get this little pocket right here. So we got to make sure we get that in there just right. So it's going to come up around here, connect in here. Right, this creates the pocket. There's kind of shadow draped across here, cutting back up this way. Back around here, and maybe let it cut back that way just a little bit. You know, now the rest of this forearm is in shadow pretty much. Like there's a little bit of light right here, but down here it's like all shadow. So we just need to figure out what's in the light and what's not, and how to get these little muscles, just the tops of them, to sit in the light, right? So we have this one dropping back that way, right? This one cutting back here. We can add a little bit of shadow maybe onto the elbow. A little bit kind of down in there, maybe along the bottom of the Anconius shape. Right, and then we can find, let's come out a little bit higher up. Let's see, we'll get shadow along this muscle here. Right, a little bit along here. And these sort of connect out there, right? And then we get the same thing along here, along here. Right, and then we can kind of link those together. You know, so based on these edges now, we're implying that this stuff is pretty rounded, you know, and then we get kind of a soft edge back in here, and then that'll connect back into here, and that'll complete that shape, right? So now we have this entire section closed off, and that'll end up being filled in with a shadow. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, let me get a little bit of some sort of way to end this hand or wrist down here. You know, there's a lot of compression. And then the hand popping out this way. But that's too close to the bottom of the page. We shouldn't be drawing down there. I should just leave it. Probably chopped off would be smarter. Excuse me. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to snap a photo of this real quick, and then I will fill it in so you guys can see it kind of the full effect, you know, and that shouldn't take too long to fill in. I mean, it only takes a minute or two. I'll fill this in real quick. Okay, so when you fill it in then, it's just about keeping things really smooth and even, right? Using the side of the pencil. It's a couple different ways. We either choke up on the pencil quite a bit, so you're gripping it just above the paper, and then going vertical strokes on the side of the pencil, stacking them up, and creating blocks of tone that way. Or I kind of anchor one knuckle, right, and then do like a circular motion with the pencil, almost like you're beating an egg kind of, and then it'll only hit the paper in one direction. Same with this, right? It was all in the downstroke in one direction. So we want to do the same thing. And you can kind of fill stuff in like this. And you can see if you practice that enough, you can build up these little soft edges and fill things in really smoothly. When you watch someone do this, it looks a whole lot easier than it is. I mean, it takes a long time to build up the dexterity to do that. And then once you kind of get that circular motion and how that works, you can kind of apply that to this too then, and do like that same kind of circular. And you can see we can build it up, something that looks softer, right, compared to that. So it's just different ways to fill stuff in. Yeah, I want to make sure we close this shape off right here. All right, we'll keep it like that. Okay, so filling it in, I'm going to go top to bottom strokes, at least initially. All in the downstroke. Okay, so you can see nice even tone. And what you'll notice is that as I fill these things in, those really soft edges I put in there suddenly don't look so soft, right? And the reason for that is because when we fill in a shape that looks really soft, or when we draw a really soft shape, I should say, right, like that. It's a really soft box, essentially. But watch, when we fill it in, all of a sudden we lose a lot of that softness, right? It doesn't look as soft. It still looks soft, but not as soft. And the reason is we lose the inside of that edge, you know, because I had it soft on both sides, kind of like that, but we just lost like half of that softness pretty much when I filled it in. So knowing that, then I'm going to come back and I'll adjust those edges a bit for a second time. That'll kind of be the last pass I think I do for today at least. Okay, so this bottom section, same thing I did up there. It's going to be all top to bottom strokes, nice and even. And there we go. That is an arm. You know, and this stuff is all shadow over here, so we can really keep this side a little bit softer even. It'll probably be fine, right? And then have this side a little more like linear. Basically it. So then we just come back and I'll adjust a couple of these edges real quick. Pull some of that shape back out right there. We're not going to go into halftone or anything, just mapping today. It isn't really like a rendering class, it's supposed to be a structure class, but I want people to see why study the structure stuff, you know? And this is why. Hopefully it'll help inform this stuff. So this needs to be a lot softer, right? We lost a lot of this softness in here. I'm going to come in here and soften this up even more. Right? And then we lost some of this, I would say. And then this stuff, I think, could be a little softer. Mostly just needs to merge, re-merge with the edge that we put on there. So they look kind of separate a little bit. Need to really link in there well. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's the goal. Try and do that. And I hope it goes well. And this is week 5. So I hope I see you guys next term too. And I hope everybody learned something and had a good time. Cool. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye.